Look at him, a driver marrying into this family. Did he wear his best uniform today?
Careful, don't tip him after the ceremony. At least tell me he can afford the flowers.
A grand hall, gold chairs, a live band tuning quietly in the corner. Grace, radiant in a simple white dress, stands beside Daniel, 30s, in a plain gray suit that doesn't quite fit at the shoulders. Around them, wedding guests in Oso-Abi and gold jewelry sip champagne. Uncle Tund raises his glass toward Daniel, grinning. Uncle Tund with loud mocking. Look at him. A driver marrying into this family. Did he wear his best uniform today? Laughter ripples across the nearby tables. Cousin Bola snorts into her glass. Careful. Don't tip him after the ceremony. Grace's mother forces a smile that doesn't reach her eyes. Vivian, Grace's sister, leans in close, her whisper pitched just loud enough to carry. To their mother. At least tell me he can afford the flowers. The laughter rolls outward, table to table, a wave nobody tries to stop. Daniel doesn't move. His hands stay folded in front of him. His expression calm, almost amused, like he's waiting for something the room can't see yet. Grace, watching her husband take it, jaw tight, eyes flicking between him and the crowd. Laughter rolled across the room like a wave. The groom stood in his plain gray suit, hands folded. He didn't flinch. He didn't argue. He just watched them laugh, his expression calm, almost amused, like he already knew something they didn't. They had no idea that in exactly 11 minutes, the sky above this wedding would prove every one of them wronged a beat. Then, faint, distant, the low hum of an engine begins to build over the sound of the band. Grace Adeyemi had always been the quiet one, growing up in a Lagos household where every Sunday after church became a quiet competition of whose daughter had married better. The daughter nobody bragged about at dinner parties. Her younger sister, Vivian, married a wealthy businessman 2 years ago, and their mother still found a way to mention his imported car at every family gathering. Her father was worse in his own quiet way. When Grace first brought Daniel home, he looked him up and down and said only one thing. A driver. And Korean, he said, shaking his head. In this Lagos, with everything happening, this is the one you bring me? Then he walked away, and never asked Daniel a single question after that. In that house, love was measured in numbers. A good marriage meant a big house. A good husband meant a full bank account. But Grace didn't want any of that. She wanted someone who made her feel safe. Someone who listened when she spoke, who noticed when she was tired, who never once made her feel small. She found that in Daniel Cho, a quiet man who drove for a living and never talked about his past. She never asked where he came from before he arrived in her city 3 years ago. He'd told her once, briefly, that he came from Seoul, and that it felt like a different lifetime. She never pushed for more than that. She never asked why. Once, a stranger in a hotel lobby froze at the sight of him and quickly looked away. Her family saw a foreign man with no money and no name they recognized. Grace saw a man with no cruelty in him at all. And on her wedding day, she had no idea just how wrong her family was about to be proven. The dinner table went silent the night Grace made her announcement. "I'm engaged," she said, holding up her hand. The ring was small, simple, nothing like the one Vivian wore. Her mother set down her fork slowly. "Engaged? To who?" "Daniel. You've met him. The driver." Her mother said the word like it tasted bad. Nobody clapped. Nobody smiled. Her mother looked at her father, and her father looked at his plate, and for a long moment, the only sound in the room was the clock on the wall. When Vivian got engaged 2 years earlier, the house had exploded with joy. Their mother screamed and cried happy tears. Their father opened his best bottle of wine. Within a week, there was a party with over 100 guests, a live band, and a cake 3 tiers tall. Neighbors came just to see the ring. For Grace there was silence. Then whispers. "What will people think?" her mother finally said, rubbing her temple like Grace had given her a headache instead of good news. "They'll think I'm happy," Grace said quietly. Her mother scoffed. "Happy doesn't pay for anything." "I'm not asking you to pay for anything," Grace said. I'm not asking you for money or a party or your approval, even. I just wanted you to be happy for me. That's all I ever wanted. No one answered her. Later that week, her aunt, calling all the way from Abuja, didn't ask about Daniel at all, only asked if Grace had thought about what people in Lagos would say. A cousin sent a message that just said, "Are you sure?" Even the family group chat, usually full of birthday wishes and holiday photos, went quiet the day she shared her news. People saw it. Nobody responded. Grace wasn't chasing wealth. She never had been. What she wanted was simple. She wanted her family to look at her the way they looked at Vivian. She wanted one dinner where nobody sighed when she spoke. She wanted peace in a house that only knew how to measure love by money. But peace, she was slowly learning, was the one thing her family refused to give her for free. She sat in her room that night, looking at the small ring on her finger, and made a quiet decision. She would marry Daniel anyway, with their blessing or without it. Because for the first time in her life, someone had chosen her without needing a reason. And she wasn't going to let silence take that away from her. If you've ever been the child your family quietly gave up on, the one nobody clapped for, the one whose good news was met with silence instead of joy, comment, "I understand her," and keep watching. Because Grace's story is only just beginning, and what her family doesn't know yet is going to change everything. The wedding day came fast, the way hard days always do. The wedding was held at a hall in Ikoyi, the kind of venue Grace's mother had been dreaming about since Vivian's own engagement 2 years earlier. Grace stood in the small church hall, her white dress simple but beautiful, her hands shaking with nerves that had nothing to do with fear. She was marrying the man she loved. That should have been enough to make the day perfect. But her family had other plans for how this day would feel. From the window, she watched the guests arrive. Guests arrived in Osoabi, matching lace and geli, gold jewelry catching the afternoon light, while a live band warmed up under a white tent. Vivian's husband had come by helicopter to her own engagement dinner 2 years ago, landing in the backyard while photographers snapped pictures for the local paper. Today, for Grace's wedding, the cars rolled in one by one, shiny and expensive, dropping off relatives in designer suits and heels that cost more than Grace's whole outfit. Then Daniel arrived. He came in a small borrowed car with a dent in the back door. He stepped out wearing a plain gray suit, slightly too big at the shoulders, the kind of suit a man rents in a hurry because he doesn't own one of his own. He carried no gift bags, no entourage, no driver of his own. Just himself, walking calmly toward the entrance like a man with nothing to prove. The whispers started before he even reached the door. "Is that the groom?" someone muttered. "I thought he'd at least borrow a nicer car," another voice said, followed by quiet laughter. Grace's mother stood near the entrance, greeting guests with a bright smile that dropped the second Daniel walked past her. She didn't say a word to him. She simply turned to greet the next guest, as if he wasn't there at all. Vivian, dressed in a gown clearly meant to outshine the bride, leaned toward her husband and whispered something behind her hand. They both laughed softly, glancing at Daniel's rented suit. Grace saw all of it from the window. Her chest tightened, not with shame, but with anger on his behalf. She wanted to run out and stand beside him, to shield him from every raised eyebrow and hidden smirk in that hall. But when she finally stepped outside and reached him, Daniel just smiled at her, calm as ever. "You look beautiful," he said, like the whispers around them didn't exist. "They're staring," she whispered back, embarrassed for him. "Let them stare," he said gently, taking her hand. "Today I'm not here for them. I'm here for you." Grace held onto that sentence the entire walk down the aisle, past the smirks, past the folded arms, past her mother's tight fake smile. She held his hand a little tighter, daring anyone to say something out loud. Nobody did. But their eyes said enough. And somewhere in that room, one man watched Daniel a little too closely, like he recognized something the rest of them didn't. The wedding faded into memory, and life became quiet. Grace and Daniel moved into a small apartment on the edge of the city. 2 rooms, a narrow kitchen, and a window that looked out over a busy street instead of a garden. It was nothing like the house she grew up in. But somehow, it felt more like home than any place she'd ever lived. Every morning, Daniel woke early for work, but he never left without making her coffee first. He remembered small things. That she liked her toast slightly burnt. That she twisted her ring when she was anxious. That she went quiet on the phone whenever her mother called, and needed a hand on her shoulder more than she needed words. "You don't have to explain her to me," he told her one night, after a call that left her staring blankly at the wall. "I'm not marrying your family, Grace. I married you." She leaned into him, and for a moment, the ache in her chest eased. He never once made her feel like a burden for needing comfort. He never raised his voice, not even when money was tight, not even when the landlord raised the rent without warning. When she cried over a message from her mother, calling the marriage a mistake she'd regret, Daniel simply held her and let her cry, saying nothing until she was ready to speak. "They don't know you," he whispered into her hair. "That's their loss, not yours." Some nights, she noticed things she didn't understand. A phone call he stepped outside to take, speaking low in a language she didn't recognize. A folder of papers he kept locked in a drawer, always careful to close it before she could see the pages. Once, she saw an unfamiliar name flash across his screen, followed by a title she didn't recognize either. When she asked, he simply said, "Old business. Nothing important," and changed the subject with a gentle kiss on her forehead. She never pushed. She trusted him completely, even in the moments that didn't fully make sense. What Grace didn't know was that Daniel carried a weight she couldn't see. A life he had left behind. A name that meant something in rooms she had never entered. He had chosen this quiet life on purpose, chosen to be simply Daniel, instead of everything else he used to be. He wasn't hiding from her. He was protecting her from a world he wasn't ready to bring her into yet. And for now, in their small apartment with its narrow kitchen and busy street below, that quiet love was enough for both of them. But somewhere, far from that apartment, people were beginning to search for him. And it was only a matter of time before they found him. 6 months into the marriage, an invitation arrived that Grace couldn't refuse. Vivian was hosting her anniversary at a hotel ballroom on Victoria Island, the kind of venue that made the society pages. It was her first wedding anniversary, and the entire family was expected to attend. It was the kind of event her mother lived for. A ballroom rented for the night, waiters in white gloves, a guest list stacked with people whose names meant something in business circles. "You should come," her mother said over the phone, her voice stiff. "It would look strange if you didn't." Grace almost said no. But Daniel touched her hand gently. "Let's go," he said. "You don't have to hide from them forever." So they went. The ballroom was everything Grace remembered from childhood. Chandeliers, silk tablecloths, the low hum of important conversations. Heads turned the moment they walked in, some out of curiosity, some already smirking. Vivian floated over in a gown that shimmered under the lights, her husband close behind her, his watch catching the light with every movement. "Grace, you made it," she said, her smile sharp at the edges. Her eyes moved to Daniel's plain black jacket, clearly not designer, clearly not new. "And you brought Daniel, was it?" "You know his name," Grace said evenly. "Of course," Vivian said, waving a hand. "I just wasn't sure he owned anything besides that gray suit from the wedding." A few guests nearby laughed quietly behind their glasses. Grace's mother appeared moments later, steering Grace away under the excuse of introducing her to an old family friend, leaving Daniel standing alone near the edge of the room. When the seating arrangements were announced, Grace found their names near the back, beside the swinging kitchen doors, far from the family table where Vivian and her husband sat like royalty. "A mistake, surely," Grace said to the coordinator. "No mistake," the woman said, checking her list. "This is where your mother requested." Daniel said nothing. He simply pulled out Grace's chair and sat down beside her, calm as ever, as if the insult hadn't landed at all. Throughout dinner, comments floated across the room, just loud enough to be heard. "I wonder if he even owns a car," someone said near their table. Rented tux, rented car, rented life. Vivian's husband muttered to a business partner, and the table erupted in laughter. Grace's hands curled into fists beneath the tablecloth. She wanted to stand up and scream that Daniel was worth 10 of them. But Daniel simply reached over and rested his hand over hers, steady and warm. "Let them talk," he murmured. "Words are cheap. Watch what happens when the truth finally speaks." Grace looked at him, confused by the strange calm in his voice. But before she could ask what he meant, the room dimmed slightly as a business associate approached their table and stopped mid-step, staring at Daniel like he'd seen a ghost. The man froze first. His glass tilted slightly in his hand, like his fingers had forgotten how to hold it. He didn't say Daniel's name out loud. He didn't have to. His whole body did the talking, shoulders pulling back, chin dropping in a small automatic bow, the kind of respect people don't fake because they don't have time to think about faking it. "I'll let you enjoy your evening," he said quickly, and walked off far faster than he'd arrived, weaving through the crowd like he needed distance more than he needed dinner. Grace watched him go, her mind spinning. "Do you know him?" "We've crossed paths," Daniel said, sipping his water like nothing unusual had happened. But something had happened. She'd seen it. That man. Mr. Park's accent had shifted slightly, the careful English of someone used to switching between Lagos boardrooms and calls to Seoul. Hadn't looked at a driver. He'd looked at someone he answered to. A waiter passed their table next and paused mid-step, refilling Daniel's glass without being asked. He set it down with both hands, careful, deliberate, the way you'd set something down in front of someone important. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. Grace's mother, watching from across the room, narrowed her eyes at the small exchange, confused by a gesture that made no sense for a man in a department store jacket. Near the coat check later, Grace caught sight of Daniel's phone lighting up in his jacket pocket. He silenced it without looking, but not before she saw the screen. Name. 3 letters and a symbol she didn't recognize, followed by a small red icon, the kind reserved for something urgent. She didn't ask. Something in his face told her not to, not yet. Then, just before they left, an older woman in a deep green gown stopped in front of their table, staring at Daniel like she was trying to solve a puzzle. Her eyes moved slowly from his face to his plain jacket to the small folded card in her hand. A printed guest list, Grace realized, the kind used to seat important business partners. She looked down at the card, looked back up at Daniel. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed again, as if she'd caught herself before saying something she wasn't supposed to say in public. She turned and walked briskly toward the front of the ballroom, disappearing through a side door marked private. Grace's stomach turned. She thought of the locked folder in his drawer at home, the one he always closed before she could see the pages. She thought of the phone calls he stepped outside to take, speaking low in a language she didn't recognize. None of it had made sense before. It still didn't. But it was starting to feel like pieces of something much bigger than old business. Across the room, Vivian's husband laughed loudly at something, still glancing their way with open mockery, still certain of his own place at the top of the room. He had no idea the side door had already started closing in on him. The jet's engine hummed louder every second, cutting through the laughter in the Ikoyi ballroom like a blade. It wasn't a local charter. Grace would later learn it had left Incheon International Airport 11 hours earlier, the moment Daniel's assistant confirmed his location. Grace turned toward the tall windows first, confused by the sound growing outside. Other guests noticed too, heads turning, conversations dying mid-sentence. Through the glass, a sleek private jet was descending toward the private airstrip attached to the hotel grounds, its lights cutting through the evening sky. "Is someone landing here?" Vivian asked, frowning, clearly annoyed that something was stealing attention from her anniversary party. Moments later, the ballroom doors opened, and a group of men in dark suits walked in with quiet, practiced precision. At the front was an older man Grace didn't recognize, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, radiating the kind of authority that made the entire room instinctively quiet down. His eyes scanned the crowd until they landed on Daniel. "Mr. Cho," the man said. his English precise but clearly not his first language. His voice carrying across the silent ballroom. "Your father has been trying to reach you from Seoul for 3 days." Gasps rippled through the room. Grace's mother's mouth fell open. Vivian's husband, mid-laugh only moments before, went pale as chalk. "Cho," someone whispered near the back. "As in Cho Industries." Daniel rose slowly from his seat, calm as ever, and straightened his plain jacket like it suddenly didn't matter what it looked like anymore. "I told him I needed time," he said simply. The silver-haired man gave a small, respectful bow. "Your father is stepping down next month, sir. The board needs your signature. And your presence." The room was frozen, every eye locked onto the man they had mocked all evening. Grace stood slowly, her heart pounding, staring at her husband like she was seeing him for the first time. "Daniel," she whispered. "What is he talking about?" Daniel turned to her, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw the full weight behind his calm. "I should have told you sooner," he said quietly. "My name isn't just Daniel Cho, the driver. My father built Cho Industries from nothing. I stepped away 3 years ago to find out who I really was, away from money, away from titles. And then I found you." The ballroom erupted into whispers, shock, disbelief. Vivian's hand flew to her mouth. Her mother gripped the back of a chair like she needed it to stay standing. Daniel turned to the room, his voice steady and clear. "You mocked my suit, my car, my job. You called me a mistake." He looked directly at Vivian's husband. "Rented life, I believe you said." The man opened his mouth, but no words came out. "I chose this life," Daniel continued. "I chose to be underestimated, so I could find someone who loved me before she ever knew what I was worth." He looked at Grace, his eyes soft despite the storm around them. "I found her. And nothing any of you say tonight changes that." Outside, through the tall windows, the jet had landed fully, its lights washing over the stunned faces pressed against the glass. The truth had finally arrived. And it had landed exactly on time. The days after the gala moved fast, the way things do once the truth is finally out. By Monday morning, the story had already spread through every circle that mattered to Grace's family. Cho Industries. A name people whispered with respect in boardrooms and business dinners across the city. And somehow, quietly, without meaning to, Grace's family had humiliated the one man connected to it who actually mattered to them. Vivian's husband felt it first, and he wasn't willing to feel it quietly. His firm's shipping contract, the one meant to move goods through the Lagos port with Cho Industries backing, was quietly reassigned to a competitor within the week. He showed up at Daniel's office uninvited on Wednesday morning, suit pressed, forced smile in place, acting as if the gala had never happened. "Daniel, great to see you again properly this time," he said, hand extended like they were old friends. Daniel didn't stand. He looked at the outstretched hand for a moment, then back at the man's face. "Rented life, wasn't it?" he said quietly. "That's what you called it. In front of a room full of people." The man's smile faltered. "That was, I didn't know who you were." "That's exactly the problem," Daniel said. "You decide how to treat people based on what they can give you. I've watched men like you my whole life. I just didn't expect to marry into a family that raised one." The man's face went red, then pale. He left without the contract he came for, and without the apology he'd rehearsed on the drive over. Grace's mother tried a softer approach, calling 3 times in 1 week, her voice suddenly warm. "We should have dinner, just the family," she said, like 6 months of silence had never happened. Grace listened quietly, remembering the seat by the kitchen doors, the tight fake smile at the wedding. "You didn't want him at your table when you thought he had nothing," Grace said calmly. "I'm not interested in the version of you that only shows up for the ones with something to offer." That evening, Grace finally asked Daniel about the folder he always kept locked away. He didn't hesitate this time. He opened the drawer, pulled it out, and set it in front of her. Inside were old photographs, handwritten letters from his father, and a resignation letter dated 3 years ago, The day he'd walked away from his name to find out who loved him without it. "I wasn't hiding secrets from you," he said. "I was protecting the version of myself I liked best. The one you fell in love with first." Grace held the letter gently, finally understanding everything that had once felt like distance between them. It wasn't loud revenge, and it wasn't a single dramatic ending. It was simply the truth, settling into place, exactly where it had always belonged. A month later, Grace's family gathered again, this time for something smaller. A quiet dinner at Daniel's request. Not a business event, not a display of wealth. Just a table, some food, and honest conversation. Her mother arrived first, unusually quiet. Vivian came without her husband. Her confidence noticeably dimmed. Even her father, who had once looked at Daniel and said only one cold sentence, sat carefully at the table, unsure of what to say now that the man across from him held more power than he ever had. Daniel didn't make them wait in awkward silence for long. "I know what this looks like," he said, his voice calm, without a trace of pride in it. "Like I'm here to prove a point. I'm not." He looked around the table slowly, then let his eyes settle on Grace. "I grew up watching people smile at my father's money and call it respect," he said. "I never knew if anyone truly saw me, or just what I could offer them. So I left. Became just Daniel. No name, no company, no title. I wanted to know, for once in my life, if someone could love me with absolutely nothing to gain." He reached across the table and took Grace's hand. "She did," he said simply. "Before the jet. Before the name. Before any of this. She chose a man with a rented suit and a borrowed car, and she never once made me feel small for it. That's not something money can buy. That's not something a title can earn. That's just her." The table was silent. Grace's mother looked down at her hands. Vivian's eyes glistened, though she quickly blinked it away. Grace didn't say anything cruel. She didn't bring up the seat by the kitchen doors, or the whispered jokes, or the months of silence after her engagement. She simply looked around the table and made a quiet decision. "I don't need you to apologize," she said gently. "I just need you to understand. I'm not choosing his money. I never was. I'm choosing the man who loved me first, when there was nothing to gain." From that day forward, Grace kept the relationships worth keeping, and let the rest fade quietly, without anger, without drama. Some bridges she rebuilt slowly, others she simply let go. Because in the end, the people who mattered were never the ones counting what Daniel had. They were the ones who had once seen his character, long before they knew his name. They judged him by his car. They never once looked at his character. And that was the only thing that was never for sale. Dearest, if you believe real love sees people before their title, subscribe, because Grace and Daniel's story isn't finished yet. See you in our next story.